Good evening. We welcome you to the fourth in our series of 6 lectures pertaining to the Sacrament of the Anointing of the Sick. We welcome you especially this evening, considering the weather we have had this afternoon. So let us pause for a moment in prayer as we enter into a deeper study of our understanding this evening of the human person and what the good Lord has given us. So let us pray. Heavenly Father, as we ponder this evening more deeply the wonder of human life and what you call forth from each of us in the awareness of that gift, we pray especially for the guidance of the Spirit upon Dr. Jean Kitchel as she shares the wealth of her own wisdom this evening. We likewise commend to your care those who are in need of your special grace at this time as they look toward the season of Lent as truly a time of spiritual spring for them. We pray especially for ourselves this evening that we might find this study helpful not only in our spiritual journey, but also in our ministry to others. We pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. We are indeed privileged to have address us this evening Dr. Jean Kitchel, Professor of Philosophy and recent chair of that particular department. Dr. Kitchel attained her BA here at Rice University, her licentiate in medieval studies from the Pontifical Institute of Medieval Studies in Toronto, and her PhD from the University of Toronto in Canada. This evening, she will be addressing the very important topic of informed consent. Dr. Kitchel has been serving at the University of St. Thomas in the philosophy department for a number of years. Her area of specialty, or shall we say, one of her area of specialties is medical ethics. So we look forward to a tremendously rich evening as we give a warm welcome to Dr. Jean Kitchel.
Thank you, Sister Madeline, and thank you to all of you for braving the floods and closed roads to get here this evening. I appreciate your making the effort. I do want to begin by saying that in talking about informed consent, a lot of this is coming out of my own lived experience in terms of dealing with the deaths of my parents in 1985 and in 2001. Okay, I'm going to start by reading something to you. Mostly I'm not going to read tonight. We're going to get the deadly stuff over with quick. An experimental vaccine prevented women from becoming persistently infected with a virus that is associated with half of all cervical cancers. Researchers reported this in the November 2nd, 2002 issue of the New England Journal of Medicine. The clinical study was a double-blind study. That means that neither the researchers nor the subjects knew who was getting a placebo and who was getting the test vaccine. It was a double-blind study in which 2,392 young women between the ages of 16 and 23 were randomly placed in one of 2 groups to receive 3 doses of either a placebo or Hpv virus-like particle vaccine. In addition to regular testing during the administration of the vaccine or placebo, the women were followed for a median of 17.4 months, not quite 1.5 years, after completion of the vaccine/placebo administration. The results of the trial showed that those in the placebo group had an incidence of persistent Hpv of 3.8 per 100 woman years at risk, while those in the vaccine group had an incidence of 0 per 100 woman years at risk. Thus, the vaccine produced 100% efficacy with a 95% confidence rate. This information is copyrighted in 2002 by the Massachusetts Medical Society. who in my estimation have no reason to fear at all that people are going to walk off with it. Now, this is the tip of an iceberg of, listen up folks, 1,670,000 English pages discovered in 0.16 seconds when I Googled the phrase HPV vaccine. Now, why is this important to our topic tonight? There are two primary reasons. First, on Friday, 2nd February 2007, Texas Governor Rick Perry issued an executive order requiring 11-year-old girls to be vaccinated against HPV using the vaccine protocol above, which is now marketed by Merck Pharmaceuticals as Gardasil. While this order does not have the effect of law, and has in fact today been rejected by the Texas legislature in one of its few overwhelmingly unanimous type of votes, as even a recommendation, it set off a national furor about the vaccine itself and about who should choose when and whether to use it. Secondly, to give genuinely informed consent in this matter, one ought to sort through over 1.5 million pages of literature about the vaccine, winnowing fact from fiction, light from shadow, a daunting task for a medical professional, much less the average parent of an 11-year-old girl, and ultimately impossible for both. In the face of an explosion of medical advances and information, how are we to formulate the informed consent necessary to healing wisely? First of all, let me say a few words about what informed consent is not, especially vis-a-vis knowledge. Any act of the will, any voluntary or what we sometimes call fully human act, involves the integration of rational knowledge with consent. And there must be knowledge in order for the consent to be given. You cannot consent to what you do not know. And so, in speaking of acts of the will, all of which in one fashion or another represent kinds of informed consent, we can distinguish things that affect the completeness of the act, and most importantly is the presence or absence of knowledge under the guise of ignorance. Sometimes we don't know, and we can't. With respect to everything that has been written since 2002 about this vaccine, it is impossible for anyone to know all of it. This is what we characterize as invincible ignorance. It cannot be overcome. And when we're getting ready to make decisions that pertain to health care, we cannot place upon ourselves the burden of knowing more than it is possible for us to know. We cannot delay our decisions simply because we fear that there may be something we do not know that is out there to be known. Some ignorance cannot reasonably be overcome. Vincible ignorance is ignorance that can reasonably be overcome. Though no one can read the 1.5+ million pages about the HPV vaccine, if you Google it, and if you're familiar with the way a Google screen comes up, you get lots of highlighted headings. And you scan those to find the aspects of the topic that you're looking for. You look to see where the information is coming from. You do some winnowing of your own, and if you're like me, you don't usually do this for more than about 5 pages of the laundry list, because after that it starts getting into things that fall into the category of things one need not know in order to deal with this issue. I did that with the screens that came up on HPV vaccine, and I found that within about half a dozen screens, all of the things that you really need to take into consideration about the ethics that surround the use of this vaccine had been brought up. So to be ignorant of those things is something for which a person could be held morally accountable. We are expected to know the things that we need to know for the conduct of our personal lives. We have a responsibility embedded in our uniqueness as creatures made in the image and likeness of God to know the things that we need to know in order to live the rational life for which God created us, a life that enables us to make choices that will eventually lead us to union with Him. So if you make no effort to know, once you see that up in that little top corner of the screen that there are 1,670,000 English pages on this subject, if you look at that and say, I can't do that, and turn off the computer, you're at the very least putting yourself in a state of vincible ignorance. You could have known. It is possible to know what we need to know. It is not necessary to know everything there is to know. And then finally, there's the affectation of ignorance, and that's what happens sometimes if we turn that Google screen off. If we suddenly fear that we're going to find out things we don't want to know, and we choose ignorance when ignorance is not necessary. This is to choose to live a less than fully human life. There is a lot of that when we're dealing with medicine, and particularly with critical medical issues. Most of us believe that if we don't go to the dentist, we won't find out that we need a root canal, and this will mean that we don't need one. If we don't go to the doctor when we have shortness of breath and chest pains, where we might get told that we have heart disease, then we won't have heart disease. It's the I don't want to know what I have a feeling I'm going to know if I go to this doctor syndrome. That's an affectation of ignorance. It's irrational. It's a particular kind of fear, intellectual dread, and it is something to be resisted. So, informed consent does not mean absolutely perfect knowledge. We're not capable of absolutely perfect knowledge. We're not absolute beings. We're not capable of absolute anything. But we are capable of sufficient knowledge to make informed judgments. And that's what informed consent is. Acquiring the available knowledge that is necessary to the decision we need to make. We can do some of this independently on our own, using instruments like Google or a good visit in a library, talking to people whose knowledge we recognize as being superior to us in ours in certain areas. We can acquire this knowledge, and when it is evident that we need the knowledge, we are morally obliged to acquire it. So that's the first thing about informed consent. To engage in it, you must have knowledge, and there are going to be times when all of us must engage in it. So there will be times when we must have knowledge, even though it may frighten us. Now, once we undertake the task of acquiring the knowledge, once we recognize that for there to be informed consent, there must be knowledge, this brings us to the realization that there is a relationship between informed consent and truth-telling. When I scan what comes up on the Google page, unfortunately, one of the things that almost invariably comes up on the first page is anything about the topic I'm researching that is in something called Wikipedia. Don't go there. Wikipedia is the intellectual equivalent of the halt leading the lame. It is, and it has this week generated an alternative to Wikipedia called Conservapedia, because all of the identifiable Wikipedia editors have identified themselves as being mostly liberal. So we now have Conservapedia, which is the conservative halt leading the conservative lame. But basically, you don't want the halt leading the lame if you can avoid it. So the quality of knowledge becomes important, whether the knowledge you are gaining is truthful, is accurate, and is adequate. That's why when I wanted to look at the issue of this vaccine, which I initially looked at for other reasons than tonight's talk, I forced myself to go to websites that are called things like cancer.gov/clinical trials/results/cervical-cancer-vaccine 1102. Now, you know that this is going to be a thriller as soon as you see the website. But that's all right. To go from that to the actual clinical study to find out how this trial was shaped, I went to one with an even more interesting name. And as you saw, it's the kind of reading that can put you to sleep. But it is also the truth about this vaccine, because where it doesn't come from is the pharmaceutical company that is now trying to sell it to 11-year-old girls. It comes from the actual clinical trials that were done under the sponsorship of government grants, and it was published in scientific journals, not showing up as advertising on nighttime television. And I'll say some more about that probably in a second. Let's pull this down now to how this starts affecting us as individuals when we are personally involved with the need for informed consent. I'm going to take as an example the deaths of my parents, because those are the two instances in which I had the most direct experience with the issue of informed consent and truth-telling. And because the deaths of my parents were separated by 16 years, the medical expectations were very different on both occasions, but the moral expectations were identical. There is the question of the physician and truth. Oftentimes, we approach issues in medical ethics as though there is going to be some kind of adversarial relationship between the physician and the patient, and mostly in terms of the patient having to somehow be protected from the physician. So let's look at how truth-telling pertains to the physician and the issue of informed consent. Well, you have to keep in mind that the physician is a human person just like you are. MD does not mean made a deity. Now, this is sometimes lost on MDs, but as long as you go in knowing this, you can, in addition to your patient-physician relationship with them, perform the spiritual act of mercy of enlightening them with the truth that they are not God. This is a good thing for all of us who are not God to know. Relieves us of an enormous burden. So the physician does have his or her own autonomy, self-determination, need to make informed decisions. This is what the physician is doing when a diagnosis is made, when a protocol is devised to treat someone. If the patient does not tell the physician the truth, the physician cannot make an informed decision, an informed choice about the care protocol for the patient. You have to be truthful. The physician, as a human being and as a professional, has a right to expect you to tell the truth so that he can do his job properly. The physician also has a responsibility to tell the truth to the patient, and this one can get sort of sticky sometimes. There's a real danger of paternalism in medicine, though we're getting away from it with younger generations of physicians. Or maybe it's just that I can intimidate younger physicians better than I used to be able to intimidate older physicians. I'm not sure which is the cause and which is the effect. But there is a genuine theory among some physicians that knowledge will hurt the patient. Now, I'll use here an example with respect to my father, who had, in fact, a very good physician with one exception. And Lord knows he was dealing with my father, who had to be dragged physically to the doctor to begin with. He didn't want to tell my father that there was no further treatment for his cancer and that he was going to die. He told my mother and me. The surgeon who did the biopsy that diagnosed his cancer originally did not want to tell him, wanted to tell my mother and me. My father was mentally competent until the moment of his death. He had a right to be told, and to be told by his physician, and to be able to ask that physician questions. He did not need my mother or me as intermediaries. But there is the fear among some physicians that if a patient knows that their diagnosis is one that has a prognosis of death, that their illness is terminal, that they are indeed going to die, and sooner rather than later, that knowing this will somehow deprive them of hope and make the failure of their health happen faster. They try to provide a medical reason for withholding the truth. Well, first of all, I don't agree with interpreting the withholding of truth as a medical tactic. But even more than that, the reason that a person has the right to know the truth from the doctor, from the physician, is because that truth is what the patient will use to make informed choices. My father, God rest his soul, was a lawyer. Now, he didn't practice law. He was an FBI agent. If you Google my father, you'll find out that according to some, he was one of J. Edgar's favorite FBI agents, which would probably have come as a surprise to my father if he had lived to the age of the internet. But in spite of being a lawyer, my father did not write a will until he knew he was going to die. Now, I'm going to say some more later on about the importance of things like wills. And most lawyers will tell you that anybody over the age of 18 ought to have a will, even if you don't think you have anything to distribute. And I'll say something about that. My father would not write a will. until he knew he was going to die. Now, had he not been told that his death was imminent, he would have died intestate. He would never have written a will. Fortunately, by the time he died, my younger brother was an adult. So guardianship of his children would not have been an issue. We were both adults. Distribution of the estate would not have been an issue. It was all going to Mother. Didn't matter whether there was a will or not. It was all going to Mother. But in some situations, the absence of a will could be catastrophic. If you have a large estate, a large family, minor children. But some people won't write a will until they think they actually need a will. And oftentimes we don't think we need a will until someone has told us that we are going to die not in the abstract, but in the concrete. Okay? So the patient is entitled to truth because that's a necessity for the patient's autonomy. And I think that the dangers of intellectual dread, that somehow this will produce a kind of paralyzing fear in the patient, I think that those dangers are overplayed. We've gotten past them when we get the patient to the physician. So informed consent requires truth-telling between the physician and the patient, and between the patient and anyone else who has a particular role to play in that person's life. And so, to get the truth, I have two questions to raise. The first one is, what should Dr. William tell? I know, it's terrible. Well, let's look back at the Gardasil example. And here is what Dr. William should tell the parents of 11-year-old girls who are being encouraged to have these vaccinations. He needs to explain to them what a double-blind protocol is. He needs to explain to them whether or not he has any financial interest in the medication, whether he had any financial interest in the research. He needs to tell them that the trial population was a group of women between the ages of 16 and 24, and that we have no idea whatsoever the effect of this vaccine of Hp 116 on prepubescent girls. We don't know what it will do to their fertility. We don't know whether the side effects will be greater in them because of the difference in their age and size to adult subjects. One of the things missing from what I was able to find out about the protocol was anything about how the approval was gotten to test the drug on the vaccine on the cohort between the ages of 16 and 21. Because unless they were in a jurisdiction where 18 is adequate for medical decision making, but at the very least they had 2 years, maybe 5 years worth of age cohorts who could not legally make the decision to participate in the research study because they were not legally capable of informed consent. So if you're going to visit this vaccine on 11-year-old girls, their parents need to know how the research was done, and particularly that it didn't involve 11-year-old girls, and that this has some prospective problems because 11-year-old girls are still developing hormonally and reproductively. I've discussed this at length with my goddaughter, who is a graduate of ours, who is now a developmental pediatrician at Johns Hopkins. She assures me that I am correct in my judgment on this, that anything hormonal or anything affecting or potentially affecting the reproductive life of a woman should not be done when she is prepubescent. We don't know what the outcome of that may be. What should patient Wilhelmina ask? She needs to ask, or her parents, if she's an 11-year-old girl, need to ask precisely what the impact of this vaccine is likely to be on her fertility. Anytime there is a treatment of a prepubescent child that is related to sexuality, one of the first questions should be, what is the effect on fertility? And if they don't know yet what the effect on fertility is, then basically you back away from it. You don't let your child or yourself, if you still have expectations of having children, participate. You ask if there's any evidence of its effect on the age group that was tested. And you ask why it hasn't been tested on adolescent females if that's the population for whom it's being recommended. Now, one of the things that I found researching this vaccine is that, in fact, physicians are saying that the best time for it to be administered is to girls. They're only administering it to girls, in spite of the fact that boys can get the HPV, can get the human papillomavirus. It's just that they don't get cervical cancer if they get it. So all of this has been directed at females because of cervical cancer. And the reason it hasn't been tested on the age group for whom they're recommending it, 11 and 12-year-old girls, is because they are not ethically acceptable research subjects for this kind of research. A parent cannot ethically give consent for his or her daughter to participate in such a study. That's why I'm so intrigued by the fact that there were a number of minor age women involved in the clinical trials, because they should not have been. It was unethical. They're not legally capable of making informed consent. You only allow children and adolescents to be subjects in clinical trials if the outcome of the clinical trial pertains directly to something that is currently threatening them. And 11-year-old girls are not threatened by the human papillomavirus because the only way that it is transmitted is by genital sexual activity. If the 11-year-old girl is vulnerable to HPV, we have a bigger problem than whether or not she might get cervical cancer 20 years later. And we should be addressing that in terms of the health care and the health needs of our children. But the results of this clinical trial are meaningless to 11-year-old girls in the ordinary way of things, and therefore they should not be put at risk. They have nothing to gain and everything to lose. And so you never use children, infants and children, as trial subjects unless what you are researching pertains to a condition that they have chronically and where they can benefit from the research and not likely be more adversely affected by it than they already are. Okay? It's very, very sticky business doing research on children. And so I'm very, very nonplussed. In fact, it started out as I was just actually mad as hell. We can blip that part out of the tape. When I heard that they were marketing this for 11 and 12-year-old girls, because nothing about it has anything to do with 11 and 12-year-old girls. But now the governors of 11 other states besides Texas are all looking at the idea of making the 11-year-old girls in their states all get it too. Don't dig too far as to whether any of these people have stock in Merck. You won't like what you find out. How do Dr. William and Wilhelmina know what to tell and what to ask? That takes us back to the acquisition of knowledge. Living a rational life is about acquiring the knowledge one needs. And at every stage of our lives, we need different kinds of knowledge, and this pertains to knowledge about healthcare as much as to anything else. If you are the parent of a little girl, as my brother is, my brother has a daughter, one daughter who is turning 15 this month, and who therefore is too old to be, mandated that she should get this virus, this vaccine rather. His other daughter is not quite 18 months old. We're reasonably sure that Governor Perry will be out of office by then. And of course, now the legislature, in one of its rare moments of wisdom, has intervened and said, not on our watch. But as the parent of daughters, there are things that my brother and sister-in-law need to know about the health of infant and adolescent girls. It's their responsibility to find out about these things. As someone like myself, old with tenure, everybody just has to live with that, I need to know different things. I need to know how Medicare works sometime before October. I need to know if it's going to work well enough. I need to know how you actually get the money that you've been putting away for retirement. I have no earthly idea. It's there. I don't know what I do to get it. I need to know different things. All of us have the things that we need to know, and as rational beings, we are responsible to acquire that knowledge. We are responsible to live what we call a reflective and examined life. We have to always treasure that we have this gift of rational life. It makes us unique in all of the creation as we know it. We are the only beings for whom informed consent is an issue. We are the only beings for whom moral good and evil are issues. We are the only beings of our direct experience who live a life making choices designed to bring us to union with the perfect good of the Creator who gave us this opportunity. Our primary moral responsibility is to live a rational life. And that means to know the things we need to know in order to do that. And that's simply a lifelong effort. I can't give you a sort of quick fix way to do it. It's what we're doing every day of our lives as adults, or at least it should be. Now, given that informed consent is so important, that it is tied into our concern with truth, our search for goodness, for what protects our nature and well-being, how do we protect informed consent? How do we guarantee it? Well, first of all, as I've already indicated, infants and children cannot give informed consent. They're not capable of informed consent. They are the kind of being who will, in the natural order of things, be capable of informed consent, and they must be treated accordingly. But they require an adult guardian, usually the parents, to consent on their behalf. And consent must be given in terms of the best interest of the child. There was a case in Houston about 10 years ago now, when a child was born with Down syndrome. Now, Down syndrome, medically known as trisomy 23, is a condition that is immediately recognizable at birth, but the implications of it only unfold themselves as the child grows and develops. We cannot tell at birth, usually, how severe the effects of Down syndrome will be. And many people who have Down syndrome are self-sufficient, are capable of living very good and even productive in the material sense lives. And even those who can't are extraordinarily happy people. The joy in most Down syndrome carriers is just extraordinary. I learned a lot about them when I lived in Canada because a philosopher named Jean Vanier, who had taught at our sister college, St. Michael's in Toronto, founded a program called the L'Arche Movement, which was to provide a living environment, a home environment for mentally impaired adults. And he wrote some elegant things about how gifted these human beings really are. And one of them, a book written about him by someone who had lived at the original foyer in France, had as its title, Enough Room for Joy. And it came from a trip to the beach where one of the residents in this family situation was asked, had the trip to the beach made him happy? And he said, yes. And they said, how happy? And he said, there's not enough room on the beach for the joy. That baby's parents that was born here in Houston, she was also born with something called esophageal atresia. That means the esophagus does not open into the gastrointestinal system, into the stomach the way it's supposed to. It's a very simple defect to correct. Failure to correct it in most newborns would be looked upon as both medical and parental negligence. But this child's parents refused to give permission for the esophageal atresia to be corrected because they did not want her to live, because she had Down syndrome. She was starved to death with pain-killing palliation. Efforts were made to go into the court and get guardianship transferred away from the parents. They were unsuccessful. Nurses walked off the floor and refused to participate. Others stayed only because they knew that somehow they had to make this child's last days comfortable. It takes a fair length of time to starve to death. And they did not dehydrate her because dehydration is painful. Her parents did not want her to suffer. They just didn't want her to live. So when you're an infant or a small child, you're protected only by the goodwill, the wisdom and the charity of your parents or some other adult guardian. And this is why it is extraordinarily important to make guardianship arrangements for your minor children before they're needed. Adolescents are on the cusp. Legally, they cannot give informed consent, but morally, they should be included in the formation of the consent that the legal guardian will make. This is difficult, but in my experience, it is always best to tell children the truth. They are much smarter than we give them credit for. They will be much more fearful if they believe that they are having the truth hidden from them than if they are given it up front. And as they mature, they become better able to participate in decision-making, to express their own goals, their own will, and they should be provided that opportunity. Adolescent medicine is only now starting to develop. Adolescents are, along with geriatric patients, the most underserved of the age cohorts. Technically, you go to a pediatrician until you're 18 years old, but nobody who's post-pubescent wants to go to the pediatrician. Unfortunately, adult internal medicine specialists do not know what to do with adolescent patients. They don't understand what's happening to them physically or mentally. So there is a movement to try to develop a subspecialty between pediatrics and adult internal medicine for the adolescent patient. And as I say, it's extremely important that guardianship arrangements be made for both infants and children and for adolescents, so that you can be confident that their best interests will be served if you are not able to speak on their behalf yourself. Now, I have some friends who are shared by at least one other group of people in this audience. They once lived in Houston. Douglas taught here at the University of St. Thomas. They have 3 children. When they had two little boys, Francois and Benoit. Maureen is French-Canadian. I helped deliver Benoit. I caught Benoit. So as I tell any pregnant student I have, don't worry, I know what to do. I don't think this is where you want to do it, but if it happens, I know what to do. One night, the Flippins and I were coming home from dinner together, and the 2 people in the room who also know them will be able to visualize this whole scene. Douglas, I'm in the back seat. Douglas sort of looks over his shoulder while he's driving. He says, "By the way, we've left you the kids in our will. Is that okay?" I said, "You've what?" I said, "We've left you the boys in our will. Is that okay with you?" I said, "Well, I guess." I said, "Why me?" "Well, they know you and they like you and you seem to be able to put up with them and you'll bring them up Catholic. We've considered our relatives. They don't know some of them. They don't like others of them, and we don't think any of them will bring them up Catholic. So if it's okay with you, if anything happens to us, you get the boys." Well, happily for all concerned, I did not get the boys. Douglas and Maureen are still happy as clams teaching at Christendom College in Virginia, and Francois and Benoit and their younger sister Dominique are grown, married, and parents themselves, and presumably have left their children to the grandparents, but not, as it happens, to me. But you need to leave them to someone, because if you don't, the state of Texas will decide who gets your children, who makes decisions for them. The only thing that could be worse is if it were the state of Louisiana, because they follow the Napoleonic Code. Here's the way it would go. If both parents die, the children go next to grandparents, which guarantees there will be a fight because they come in pairs. or to adult siblings, if they're considered adult enough, or to a guardian ad litem, who's just a lawyer who, makes sure that their inheritance is protected. You do not want it to happen this way. You must protect your children because you are the one who makes their choices. And one of the most fundamental choices you make about your children is how they will be reared, what values they will be taught, what religion they will practice, what kind of education they will get. You must be sure that in your absence, someone you can trust to follow your hopes and dreams for your children will be allowed to step in to do that. Okay? Adults who never reach full mental competence also require a moral agent. They are effectively children in adult bodies. I have a cousin who has a child like this who is a young man, lives a very happy and productive life at the Brookwood Center, which I highly recommend to you as a place for both your charity and your purchase of plants and ceramics. He has the physical development probably of a boy about 15 or 16, the mental development of a child maybe 10 or 12. He can't read or write. He cannot talk, but he does speak American Sign Language. He can communicate that way. But he doesn't understand spoken language. Not because he's deaf, but because he's not able to speak, and because of his mental impairment. When his older, by about 3 months, adopted sister got married, he made the party favors for her wedding. He made little ceramic angels and tied them with ribbon the color of her bridesmaids' dresses and stood at the door of the church as we entered and gave each one an angel for his sister's wedding. I'm deeply grateful that he was born to my cousins and not to the parents of that little girl at Texas Children's Hospital 10 years ago. What about us? Adults who, to all appearances, are mentally competent. We can and must give informed consent. We have a moral obligation to reflect on the choices we would make, especially in extreme circumstances. And we have an obligation to make those choices known against the day when we might be unable to speak for ourselves. How do we do that? How do those of us who are adult, who are mentally competent, who are capable of giving informed consent as we sit gathered here together now, how do we protect that capacity against the day when we might not have it either fully or at all? There are two primary means of doing this. And I recommend them to all of you, including those of you who are students who think that these issues are, donkey's years in the future for you. One is that you must have a durable power of attorney for health care. Now, if you have a durable power of attorney vested in someone so that they can do banking, take care of your property, a fiduciary power of attorney, that won't do it. It has to be specifically a durable, it must be durable. This is legal mumbo jumbo. But when you ask for one, it needs to be durable, and it needs to be a durable power of attorney for health care. Now, the effect of this instrument, which is easily gotten from an attorney, and in fact, I think you can probably buy computer software and draw the papers up yourself, and as long as you get the signatures notarized, that's all you need to do. But what the durable power of attorney for health care does is that it makes the person in whom it is vested able to make medical decisions on your behalf if you are not able to make them yourself. For those of you with us tonight who are in religious communities, you need one of these. The civil law does not recognize your relationship to your religious superiors. They will want to find your next of kin to make decisions for you. When I was in the convent, this meant that we had to find an elderly woman in Ireland in order to authorize medical treatment for one of our elderly sisters, because we discovered the Superior General couldn't do it. The Superior General may control you under canon law, but not under the laws of Texas. So even those of you who are vowed religious must have a durable power of attorney for health care. You can vest it in anyone you wish, including your religious superior. If you do that, I would recommend trying to set it up where instead of giving a personal name, you name the office, because superiors change frequently over the course of one's lifetime. So that's the first thing you need. Now, the person you name must be someone who is on the same ethical page with you, who is willing to follow your choices. Oftentimes, when we're making decisions about health care, there is more than one acceptable choice. And the fact that someone chooses the one of them that you would not choose does not mean that you can't serve as their agent. My brother is opposed to organ donation. I'm not. When I die, if there's anything of me left that can be used, they are welcome to it. I won't need it anymore, at least not right then. Now, I don't sign the donor card. I've taught too many pre-medical students. I don't want anybody to know that they can have my organs until after I have been pronounced dead. I don't want anybody to have a vested interest in my dying. Not getting very wealthy has helped in this regard. Not marrying and having children has helped in this regard, but not going public as an organ donor is sort of my last buffer zone between me and people who went to medical schools where medical ethics is the name they give to the course on litigation management. But where things like good and evil are never mentioned. It's just you can get sued or you can't get sued, you'll win or you'll lose. That's medical ethics in medical schools, which is a sad commentary. So you want the person who has your durable power of attorney to be able to consent. My being in favor of it is not of a sort that makes me reluctant to act on my brother's behalf should it become necessary, and to refuse it. We refused it for my mother because she didn't want it. On the other hand, if you are asked to accept someone's durable power of attorney, to become their spokesperson about medical moral decision-making, the reason you have to be on the same ethical page is that you can't agree to do something that you do find objectively morally wrong. If the person who asks you to accept their durable power of attorney for health care wants to be euthanized, if that's part of what they want, and you recognize that euthanasia is a moral evil, then you cannot be that person's moral agent. You can't facilitate another person's evil intent. It puts you in cooperation with evil. You can't do that. And you have to be sure that the person who acts as your agent is willing to do what you want done, whether that's what they would do or not. And obviously, what you can't want is for something morally evil to be done, which brings us to the other primary means of protecting our informed consent, and that's the Advance Directive for Physicians. The importance of this document, and indeed of the durable power of attorney, became very well publicized during the Terry Schiavo case, because much of the litigation that surrounded that case was the result of there being no written record of Terry Schiavo's will in these matters. There was only hearsay evidence. It arose in questionable circumstances with questionable timing. It was a disastrous situation, and partly because Ms. Schiavo did not have these two instruments in place. It might be that she would have placed her durable power of attorney for health care in the person of her husband. And it might be that her advance directive for physicians would have requested doing things that, in my judgment, are morally impermissible, but often legally permitted. But at least we would have known. What needs to be in an advance directive for physicians? Well, this goes back to how much you know. This is the 4-page, which is why I didn't make copies of it, it's too long. This is the 4-page directive to physicians and family or surrogates that the Archdiocese makes available to priests and religious if they need a form to go by that enables them to make a directive that they can be assured is conformable with Catholic moral teaching in these areas. I'm going to say a few things about that because the bishops and I don't completely agree on some of these things. Neither do Father Crooker and I. But when the time comes, Father Crooker is going to be happy if I'm there instead of a bishop. Okay. Basically, this is what it needs. I, fill in your name, recognize that the best health care is based upon a partnership of trust and communication with my physician. Well, we've dealt with that one. My physician and I will make health care decisions together as long as I am of sound mind and able to make my wishes known. If there comes a time that I am unable to make medical decisions about myself because of illness or injury, I direct that the following treatment preferences be honored. And notice, this directive it's always referred to as the Advance Directive to Physicians, but it is also going to be the guideline for the person who holds your durable power of attorney for health care. It's going to be that person's backup when, especially if they and the physicians get into disagreement, or if they and other members of your family or circle of friends get into disagreement. So this is being written not just for physicians, but for everyone who will have a legal or professional role in making decisions for you. If, in the judgment of my physician, I am suffering with a terminal condition from which I am expected to die within 6 months, even with available life-sustaining treatment, provided in accordance with prevailing standards of medical care. I request that all treatments other than those needed to keep me comfortable be discontinued or withheld, allowing me to die as gently as possible, or I request that I be kept alive in this terminal condition using available life-sustaining treatment. This selection does not apply to hospice care. If in the judgment of my physician I am suffering with an irreversible condition so that I cannot care for myself or make decisions for myself and am expected to die without life-sustaining treatment provided in accordance with prevailing standards of care. And then you get the same two choices. Additional requests, and if you use this form, you definitely want to put in some additional requests. After discussion with your physician, you may wish to consider listing particular treatments in this space that you do or do not want in specific circumstances, such as artificial nutrition and fluids, intravenous antibiotics, etc. Be sure to state whether you do or do not want the particular treatment. Now, this is where we have to start making some very specific choices. The check off the box choice in this form, when it gives as a possible request, namely that all treatments other than those needed to keep me comfortable be discontinued or withheld, what many people don't realize is that that includes food and water. This is considered in many quarters, including among the bishops of Texas, who listened to a Dominican friar instead of two Catholic laywomen when they were debating this issue. But in the medical community, and the bishops have followed the position of the medical community, if hydration and alimentation are being administered intravenously, they are considered artificial and considered medical treatment. I do not look upon food and water as medical treatment. They are a basic necessity for human life. If it is clear, and now I'll refer to my mother's death, if it is clear that the patient is so close to death that the organs of metabolism and excretion have shut down. My mother's kidneys shut down. She could not produce waste fluid anymore. She never did have artificial alimentation set up because her death came fairly suddenly. When it was clear that her kidneys had shut down and she was not going to benefit from hydration, it was going to be counterproductive, we removed it. Of course, her physician had been taught in high school by one of the students I taught at this university. And he said, "We don't want your mother's death to be pharmaceutical, we want it to be natural." That's always a good sign. There are times when it is appropriate to withdraw hydration. They are few and they are at when death is imminent, not when it's 6 months down the road. Now, in the case of Terry Schiavo, what her husband went to court to get permission to do was to remove hydration and alimentation. She was receiving them through a tube in her abdomen, but she was metabolizing the nutrients. She was excreting the appropriate solid and liquid wastes. She was not dying. She was in what appeared to be an irreversible condition, but she wasn't dying. The reason that I insist in my advance directive that hydration and alimentation not be removed until and unless it is clear that my body cannot metabolize or otherwise process them is because the only reason to stop food and water from a living being that is able to benefit from them, to sustain life through them, is to cause them to die. That is the only thing that can result from that choice. If you choose not to feed a living being, including a person, who is able to metabolize nutrients and excrete waste, then the only result that can come from refusing the alimentation is death. If you deny hydration to a person whose kidneys are functioning and who is able to receive the fluid, pass it through the system, and excrete it as urine, the only reason to withhold that from a living being is to cause it to die, because that's the only end to which that act can lead. There's nothing else it does. So I reject the notion that food and water are medical treatment. They are something basic to human nature. We have a basic human need for them, and as long as we're benefiting from them, I think we have a right to them. So I stipulate in my directive this point of view. Now, you can disagree with me and still be in the odor of sanctity with a lot of our bishops, but I'm a convert, and I've never stood in quite the same awe of the clergy as some cradle Catholics. I went to school with priests. I've been a nun for a short time. I didn't make final vows. I've taught at least one bishop, but the count's not in yet. So on this particular matter, I'm willing to disagree with them. It's not covered in the Nicene Creed, so I think that I can disagree with them without excommunicating myself. At least I hope so. If I can't, Father Gianpietro and Father Crooker will tell me so after I stop talking and let you talk. But these are the kinds of things that you want to cover. You want to look at. I don't think anyone should give so blanket a statement as, I request that all treatments other than those needed to keep me comfortable be discontinued. That's just too broad. That's just too broad. I think you do want to make some stipulations, and they should be stipulations that are protective of the dignity of human life. They should be stipulations that make it clear that although you do not fear dying, and you are willing to die when it is clear that this is the next step in your being, you do not wish to be killed. I think we have to make that clear. And we especially have to make it clear in the culture of death in which we live, where killing people is considered one of the best medical approaches to difficulties with people, whatever age they happen to be. If we don't protect informed consent in these ways, we will fail to honor one of the two ends of life. A lot of this always gets focused on the biological end of life, but there is the spiritual end to which life is directed. My father was unconscious for the last probably 48 hours of his life. My mother, the same. I do not know in what kind of spiritual conversation they may have been engaged. There is no way to tell. But I was not going to interfere with it by causing their death. Fortunately, each had a swift and happy death, a peaceful death. Not all of us are so blessed, but we don't know what happens in those last days and moments, and it is not for us to terminate that part of a person's path to God prematurely. The spiritual end of life must be honored, though the medical community is not as persuaded of it sometimes as I am, which is why, and I'll close with this, and you can pepper me with questions about the specific things that interest you. This is why I strongly urge that wherever you leave your heart, it not be in Portland, Oregon. Oregon permits euthanasia. Oregon has tried on several occasions to deny Medicare to people of certain ages, like the ages of people who are eligible to get Medicare. They set it up like a Chinese menu. My Chinese goddaughter says I may call it that. If you're between 50 and 55, you can have anything on the menu. Between 55 and 60, you can have anything except column A. Between 60 and 65, you can have anything except column A and column B. Between 65 and 70, you can have column D. But after 70, why have you hung around so long? If I ever go on vacation to Oregon, since it's the trendy thing to do now, I'm going to have my advanced directive tattooed on my torso. And on that happy note, I will close and thank you for your attention and ask for questions. We do have microphones available in the back. Okay. If you think your voice carries well, I think one reason they would like people to use the microphones is because of the taping that's being done. Am I correct in that, fellows? Okay. So if you don't mind speaking into the mic so that it will get picked up by the tape.
Dr. Kitchel, if I understood correctly, you said in the advanced directive for physicians that, in your opinion, food and water are not medical treatment but essential treatment. Mm-hmm. Does that differ from what the Archdiocese instrument shows?
It differs in the sense that the Archdiocesan instrument does not require you to take that position. In other words, it doesn't require you to stipulate about food and water. Okay. They are willing to accept the medical community's tendency to look upon it as medical treatment if it is being artificially administered. And by that they mean if you're receiving it some other way than through the mouth.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. But their instrument does make provision for you to include that if you want to. Oh, Lord.
First of all, I don't know why you think I disagree with you about food and water. I am in complete agreement with you, and I think the Holy Father has expressed similar views. I know his predecessor did.
Okay.
Pope John Paul certainly said that food and water were not extraordinary means. But anyhow, what I wanted to ask you was about the situation in which the patient during his lifetime has made it quite clear that he's unwilling to accept certain interventions which common moral teaching of the Church considers obligatory. And now he's incompetent, and he has not left any clear directive, but I'm his physician. I'm not, obviously, but if I were his physician, what is my obligation with respect to a patient who would certainly not let me do this if he were able to refuse, but he's no longer able? You see the problem?
Mm-hmm, I do. If there is no written instrument, and if there's because I'd like to couch it both in terms of the physician and whoever legally becomes that person's agent. Because I think with the agent, it's clearer what your role is. If you by default, become the moral agent for a person who is not able to speak for himself, and you know that that person would make choices that you believe are objectively morally wrong. If you are legally required to act on that person's behalf, then you can't honor those morally wrong intents on his or her part. And you have to assume and believe that there will be a time when the person is grateful that you did not honor those morally wrong intentions on his part. Now, the physician, I think, in any event, is simply required to make the best medical judgment he can. The physician is not usually seen as the arbiter of morality, more likely the arbiter of legality. And so I don't know that the physician would be making these decisions. It may be that the physician will be the person most likely to know what decisions the patient was inclined towards. And he certainly can make that known to whoever has the legal responsibility. But I don't think that anyone in any circumstance can authorize what he or she believes to be morally wrong simply because the person on whose behalf it's being authorized would have wanted it. This is why oftentimes hospitals, acute care facilities especially, will refuse to cooperate with patients who want to starve to death. They won't let that. You know, if a competent patient wants to refuse ordinary medical treatment for the purpose of dying, a lot of hospitals will not cooperate with that. Now, I think as much for legal reasons as moral ones. But I think that any person called upon to make a decision on behalf of another person must make a decision that they believe is morally acceptable.
The specific situation I can illustrate most clearly would be someone who has said emphatically, while in good health, I will never let them put a tube into my stomach. I mean, a stomach tube, I've had them many times, and not many times, but several times, and they're not bad, but people have a terrible feeling about them.
Yeah.
And clearly, tube feeding is obligatory in many circumstances morally. But if the person, while conscious, has emphatically said, I do not consent to have a stomach tube in me for any reason whatever, and he's now comatose, what is his physician or his guardian supposed to do about it? That was the sort of question I had in mind.
I think the physician is simply supposed to lay the medical facts out. Why this is ordinary treatment, why this is medically justifiable, why withholding of it would itself be extraordinary, would be contrary to standard medical practice. I think that's the role of the physician. I think the role of the guardian is, if I know that somebody wants something that I think is wrong, the bottom line is I can't do that. I can't authorize that. You can't authorize evil because it puts you in cooperation with it. And even if it's only material cooperation, it puts you in greater proximity than I think is acceptable. I think that you can, then I think the dilemma for you really becomes, do I withdraw as guardian and let the guardianship pass to someone who will facilitate this evil? Or do I retain my position as guardian so as to prevent the evil? Those are the kinds of questions we hope we never have to answer in real life. But that, I think, would be the guardian's real dilemma. What what moral posture am I in if I say, well, I won't do it, but I'll get out of the way and let somebody else do it? You're still in cooperation, you're just not quite as proximate. So I'd stay in there and fight the good fight. And hope that what I had done would be understood when the time came. I think I thought you'd disagree with me because I was so used to it from student days.
Hi, Dr. Kitchel.
Hi.
My question has to do along this same line, back on, but more specifically, accepting a power of, the durable power of attorney. You said when asked to accept, you must be able to do what they say they want. Now, where's the ethics in accepting the durable power of attorney for someone that you know would want euthanasia or assisted suicide or something, knowing that you would never cooperate with it?
You can't.
Knowing already. Should you decline at that point?
Yes, because otherwise you are not telling them the truth.
Right, back to
You're
what you said at the very
using
beginning.
deception. And as long as they're competent, they do have the right even to make their own moral errors as long as they're not contrary to civil law. You can't try to prevent their moral error by lying to them.
Right.
Because then you've committed your own moral error.
You can, of course,
Yeah.
try to
You
reason with them.
You can take that opportunity to say, if this is what you want, I can't do it, and this is why. Don't you want to reconsider these things? Don't you want to rethink these things? But if they will not change their mind, then you have to deal honestly with them and say, then I am not the person to hold your power of attorney.
Now, say a young husband and wife set this up for each other, and neither needs it for another 25, 30 years or something, and in that course, we all mature and get wiser and probably think differently, at least half of them maybe. What happens if you have changed your understanding and now do not agree with that person?
Then as things change, these instruments should probably be renewed about every 5 or 6 years, or the courts, they can be challenged more effectively in court as being out of date, as no longer reflecting what you really meant. It's just like a will that's 50 years old is not going to look as strong in court as a will that's 2 years old. So I always recommend that people revisit these two documents about every 5 or 6 years, and certainly every time there's a major life event, like the birth of another child, the death of someone who's involved in this. If you come to the realization that you can no longer serve as the person's durable power of attorney for health care because you no longer support what they want done, then I think you sit down with that person and you say, have you rethought these issues? Do you still agree with what you put in your directive? Because if you do, I'm going to have to withdraw as your from holding your power of attorney. But it may well be that they have also been rethinking things. This can become an opportunity to do that, but for exactly the reason you say. As we grow and mature and our circumstances change, and especially as our knowledge changes, as the medical circumstances in which we can find ourselves change, for all those reasons, these are the kinds of things that should be revisited on a regular basis, because there are some parts of them that with medical advances and with changes in one's own personal circumstances will change. There's some parts of them that will never change. Like, I'm reasonably sure that the Flippins' will no longer leaves their children to me.
What would be you said an MD has, to Father's question, has a responsibility to tell them the full scenario of the situation. If they're Catholic, as a physician, we're calling upon our politicians right now who are Catholic to be acting in the political arena according to the church's teachings on certain things. Would that not be so also for an MD, especially if the patient were also a Catholic?
Well, a Catholic physician, independently of whether the patient is Catholic or not, and this does, I think, bear on Father's question, a Catholic physician ought not to be recommending or referring people to choices that he or she believes are objectively morally wrong. This is a particular difficulty for people who are in OBGYN, where some things that are very standard in that field of medicine are contrary to the teachings of the faith, and Catholic physicians have to act accordingly. But again, what that physician has to do is tell a patient going in, there are certain things that I will not do. And in different specialties, you know whether or not this is going to come up. It's much more difficult to be a Catholic obstetrician and gynecologist than it is to be a Catholic dermatologist. But I think you have to make that clear to your patients. Again, it goes back to the truth telling. You have to acknowledge that my goddaughter, for instance, to whom I've referred, who graduated from here and went on to medical school here in Houston and is now at Johns Hopkins, she did her residency in a Catholic hospital in St. Louis, and she told every place that she went to interview before match day, this elaborate betrothal process that graduating physicians go through. She told every place that she interviewed that she was a Catholic and that she would not prescribe birth control to adolescent girls as a pediatrician. And she said, if you're going to require me to do that, then we may as well just stop it right here because I won't do it. Well, she matched with a Catholic hospital in St. Louis, and she refused to prescribe contraceptives for an adolescent girl whose mother was trying to get them for her because she'd gotten pregnant once and she didn't want her to do it again. And my goddaughter said no, and the woman complained. And they came to my goddaughter and said, we've had this complaint because you didn't prescribe contraceptives when they were asked for. She said, well, first of all, we're a Catholic hospital. And she said, and then secondly, I told you when I interviewed that I would not prescribe contraceptives to adolescent girls, to prepubescent girls. It's just bad medicine. She said, independent of whether I think it's bad morality, it's bad medicine, and I won't do it. Well, the next time someone asks, hand that patient off to one of the other residents who's willing to prescribe them. So she called me on the phone and she said, Auntie Jean, this hospital, they don't accept that it's bad medicine, but even worse, they don't accept that it's contrary to the moral teachings of the church. What do I do? I said, you don't do anything. I said, just keep doing what you're doing. Keep not prescribing them. Don't hand them off. You're a doctor now. They can't do as much to you as they could when you were a student. I said, I will call Father Miller, now Archbishop Miller, who at that time was in the Secretariat of State in Rome and had been my goddaughter's spiritual director when we were all here in Houston. I said, I will call Father Miller, whose former boss in the Secretariat of State in the English section is now your new ordinary. And Father Miller will let your new ordinary know what's going on in his Catholic hospital, and they'll never trace it back to you. And so that's exactly what I did. I knew if I wrote the letter, it might get traced back, but that Father Miller could simply pick up the telephone and say, Justin, we've got a problem, or actually, you've got a problem. But a Catholic physician, that you are a physician is your apostolate. It's what you do for the kingdom of God. That you are a Catholic, it's your vocation. It's the way God has called you to Him. And that vocation can never be subordinated to something that is as paraccidens as your apostolate. You don't always have to be a physician. You don't always have to be a professor. Those are things you can change. But if you truly embrace the Catholic faith, you can't change being Catholic because it has become part of you. It's become your way to God, which is the end to which all of us are called. So the Catholic physician, the Catholic patient, the Catholic lawyer, the Catholic retiree, you still must live your life. You must make your choices in fidelity to the will of God. That's not always easy. God's not as popular in some quarters as He is with us. But I've read the Bible several times because I started out as a Southern Baptist, and that's what we did. And as many times as I've read it, I cannot find any place in it that says it will be easy or it will be fair. But I did find one thing, and I'll use this to close the evening for us. I did find one thing that I think is pertinent to what we have been talking about. It's from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 30, starting with the 19th verse. I call heaven and earth today to witness against you. I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Choose life, then, that you and your descendants may live, by loving the Lord your God, heeding His voice, and holding fast to Him, for that will mean life for you. Remember what Jesus said in John's Gospel, I am the life. And our relationship to that life is the one that every choice we make should be protecting. Thank you.